There
There
we
you
are.
go.
Now I can see you. Hey, my goodness, we finally are getting there. Anyway, um, what I would do is I use a histogram a lot to get my exposure, and normally I like to get two of them to the right edge of the histogram. But in this case, because we have a strong red, I have to be very careful and just make sure I just get the red channel up against the right edge of the histogram. And also for focus, I would put my AF focus point right there because you want to put your focus point on something with contrast, light and dark, so that it can see it and focus right on it. Okay, and now this arrow I don't need all the time, so I can just park it over there. Okay, at any rate, here's the histogram. It's a very simple thing. I'm sure you all know it pretty well. The bright areas in the picture, of course, are way on the right-hand side. The midtones are here and the shadows are there. And for years, what I did is I would just move my histogram over till the right wall was actually touching the right edge of the histogram. In other words, the data was touching the right edge of the histogram. Now, I shoot only RAW. I don't shoot JPEG at all. I prefer to process the RAW file. And what I do is I'm aware that the histogram and the highlighter of the blinkies are both based on an embedded JPEG in the RAW file. So what I do is I just get the very rightmost data touching the right wall, and that's what I call proper exposure. I'm not overexposing the highlights when it's just touching the right wall because I know it's a JPEG and not the raw data. And when I process the raw file, I can easily get plenty of detail in the highlights. And then another thing that I do is I like to keep things simple. Unlike this Zoom program, which is hard for me because I'm not really computer literate. I do the best I can. I'm way better at writing, but I'm also pretty good with cameras. And I make the cameras simple for me. And all of my cameras, for landscapes, I use only manual exposure. Now, if I was doing wildlife, I use a lot of auto ISO. But for landscapes, I only do it on manual. And what I do is to move the histogram data the way I want, either to add light by moving it to the right. What I do is I had to change my buttons on my camera. I'm using the Canon R5, and my shutter button and my aperture control dial, the way it comes from, in order to move the histogram data to the right, you got to turn the button left. From the top of the button, go left, just the opposite way. And so 25 years ago, I thought that was crazy. So what I did is I customized those buttons, and all I did is, and most cameras have this capability, I simply reversed the dial direction. So now when I see I need to add light, move the exposure to the right, I just take my exposure control and I just do clicks to the right. I just move the button the same direction I want my exposure to go. And by doing that, I never make a mistake. I don't have to think about, am I opening up or closing down? All I got to know is from the top of the button, turn it right, and I'm adding light, turn it left, I'm subtracting light. And that really makes things much easier for me. Okay, and then another thing I do a lot of is I still use a tripod a great deal. It's actually gotten easier to handhold because of short lenses and brighter light, and with image stabilization, it does work. But most of the time, landscape, the best light is softer light. Usually it's early and late in the day, it's sunset, sunrise, even at night. And so what I do is I use a good sturdy tripod and ball head, and I used to use the cable release all the time, but now I almost always just use the 2 second self timer. That works really well. And all I do is when I want to shoot, I just gently press my shutter button. I pull my hands away. I don't touch the tripod like a lot of people make that mistake. And 2 seconds later, it takes the picture. That works really well. I used to use a self timer a lot. And frankly, there are landscapes where you do need a self timer, where say you're trying to catch a wave crashing into a rock along Lake Superior. Well, you need to be able to fire that camera as soon as that wave gets big, and you can't guess ahead of time when is that wave going to be big, 2 seconds, and fire in time. So there are times when you're trying to catch the peak of the action or the peak of
Well,
stillness, like when
Betty,
the wind isn't blowing
if
anymore.
you want to, you can bring up the Xfinity app and get the game on your iPad if you want to. Maybe later.
Okay, what are we talking about?
Sorry, it's somebody who's not muted. I'm gonna mute all again. So John, you unmute yourself, okay?
Okay, there we go. And so
Okay.
what I do is I mainly use the 2 second self timer because one problem I see with a cable release is teaching workshops. Quite often people say, John, my camera locked up, I can't do anything. And if I see a cable release, that's the first thing I look at because so often people accidentally lock their cable release and they don't realize that, and that locks their camera up. So that's one problem you don't have by just using the 2 second self timer. And now I'm trying to, uh-oh, let's see. It won't move now. Um,
Okay, well, get out of presenter view. Okay,
uh-oh.
are you using your right
Yeah,
stick?
yeah, I'm not. Oh, there it goes. I finally got the screen to go to the next picture.
Okay.
Okay, another thing I do is I like to have really sharp pictures. That's one thing my buyers always knew. Is when I sent them pictures, if nothing else, they were sharp. Because I was taught by John Shaw and Larry West way back in the early 70s, and they had good technique, and I ran with it, what they taught me, and it's worked really well. And a lot of people say with landscapes you want to stop down a lot. Well, I hardly ever stop down anymore. There are exceptions, but there's no reason to stop down here, for example, because everything here is at infinity focus. So I would just set my AF point right here so I'd focus there, and I would use F8. And I use F8 because generally that's about the sharpest aperture on a lens. And there's no reason to stop down and suffer degradation by using a smaller aperture when F8 is going to cover anything because everything's at infinity. Now, if everything's not at infinity, there's other answers, and we'll get to that later on in the program. For example, here, I stopped all the way down. Now, I almost never use F22 because if I'm trying to cover extreme depth of field, what I would do is I would focus stack right away. But here, I'm using F22 because I'm doing sun stars. This is, of course, Old Faithful, and I like to do it backlit. You get a nice calm day, and especially in winter, and in the afternoon, go around. Most people shoot it front lit. Well, I find that pretty boring. I much prefer the backlighting, so I walk all the way around behind Old Faithful, and then I underexpose. I make the picture exposure pretty dark because I want this sun star to really pop up nicely in the photograph. And then when I process it, I can bring up some more detail here. So, and by using f22 with a small lens, you have a small aperture, and that tends to turn the sun right into a star. So that's always not something nice to remember and to do. And here's another example of Yellowstone, again doing sun stars by stopping down to f22. Now that's about the only time I would stop down anywhere near that much is when I'm doing a sun star. Now, when you're doing landscapes, again, light is really critical. I'm usually out there early and late, and this was during, Zoom, send to Zoom. It crashed. Let me see here. Maybe it's still working. Can you hear
Yeah,
everybody?
you're still fine.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, there it goes again. Oh, don't send. Okay, I'll just.
Don't send. Yeah. Okay, now you're frozen. All right, he crashed. Okay. Well, I see. Okay, you're muted, John. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, John. We can't hear you. There's on the left-hand side where there's mute.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay. Now go
Okay.
back to sharing your screen.
Okay. How sharing the screen? How do I
Yeah,
do that?
Dixie needs to show you instead of just doing it
Okay.
himself. Just
Okay.
show him, pay attention, show him so that you can do it yourself.
Well, I don't learn that fast. Everything here is new to me.
Oh my gosh.
Uh,
Okay, yep, good.
I,
It
I
takes a
think we're
second.
possessed.
It takes a second for it to come back up. There you go. All right. Yep.
Okay.
Or you can hit don't send or just hit the little X. Okay. Hit the little X in the upper right hand corner to get the one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right there.
Okay. I wish we could make it stop doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. At any rate, that's, can you hear me now and
Yeah. Well,
everything?
you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. Okay, this is over by Gardner, and on the way in, sometimes you get really special light in the morning, and here we had a lot of clouds, but just a little bit of early morning sunshine came out, and that's what I liked about this, because we're shooting down on our way into Mammoth, and I like how the light is just sidelighting all these hills with the fog down there, so I thought that was a real nice photograph. And then when I processed it, I darkened the dark clouds even more, because I wanted a lot of contrast in this picture. Okay, now I'm trying to go to the next picture and it won't do it.
Are you using cursor right? Your cursor keys?
Okay,
How about using your cursor keys? Does that work?
um, hmm, don't know what happened.
Or get out of full screen mode and figure it out.
Funny, it was working fine, and then now it's not. Okay, I can't get the slide program to advance.
Get out of full screen mode.
How do you do it? He's saying get out of full screen mode, Dixie.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
Okay, Dixie's trying to get me out of this.
Yeah. Hit escape.
Okay, escape. I can.
It's not working either.
Oh, that's not working either.
Try right arrow key.
Yeah, I've lost control.
Oh, you're
You have
saying
the
right
right
click.
arrow key on your keyboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's done that. What about right clicking on the program on PowerPoint? Right click
Okay.
on it. So you get a sub menu that can say,
Um.
yeah, what's down there? Yeah, there you go. You were
Okay. That now it went.
okay.
I just wish I knew what's controlling this now. But anyways,
How are you
um,
moving from slide to slide?
well, I was right arrowing until it stopped working.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there it backed up. Now it's working. So I don't know why.
Yeah,
But
try
anyways,
try tab right arrow or something. I don't know.
yeah, let's move. Let's move along. Yeah. Now can you see where I moved to the next screen?
Yes, we can.
So, okay. So anyways, so useful landscape lenses. I have quite a few of them, and I really like to use zoom lenses. So you can see these are the ones I have. I'm using now a 15 to 35, a 24 105, a 7200, and then I have 100 to 500. I don't actually have the 100 to 400 anymore. And so basically I'm covering everything from 15 to 500 millimeters in my camera bag at all the time. Now usually when I'm doing landscapes I'm shooting really wide around 15 and out to about 200, but sometimes I do landscape with a really long lens. And I have a real fast one here. The 15 to 35 is fast, and that's 2.8. And I did that on purpose because I like to shoot the night sky. And so I know to get lots of stars in the sky, I want 2.8, about ISO 3200 for about 20 seconds. And that'll give me a lot of stars in the sky if it's a dark night. Now, let's show you some examples with these lenses. 15 to 35 I use a lot. And this one works really good. This is actually called the Cathedral. It's in the Smoky Mountain National Park where we teach fall color workshop. And at certain times in fall color, you get this beautiful, all these beautiful leaves here along this nice river right here. And then always think in terms of composition. To me, the flow is coming right down here and goes to the left. So it makes a strong horizontal, and of course I like these leaves right here on the rock, but it can also be a nice vertical as well. So don't be afraid to go vertical, horizontal, and you'll notice I compose it so I didn't get any white sky at the top of the frame. I wouldn't want that. That would be a distraction, so I avoided that. And then again, with a wide angle lens, shooting from the bridge up the rivers. It works so nicely using a fairly long exposure. And again, I'm using a tripod most of the time, especially when the light is dim and soft. I like a tripod. And then I'm always looking for multiple composition. This is one of my favorite falls over by the east side of the Smoky Mountain National Park. And it's a real beautiful fall, especially if it's rained really hard because it's a small fall. So sometimes there's not enough water going over it. But if it rained during the night, the next morning is a great time to go there. And then this is just from the boardwalk there. They have a bridge over the river and just another section of that waterfalls. Now, exposure, I've changed over the years. What I used to do is a histogram all the time, and I could nowadays with my mirrorless cameras, I can see the histogram right in my viewfinder. So what I do now is I just move it over to the right, and then I take a quick picture, and I play it back so I can see if I have any first blinkies, any blinkies showing up in the highlight. So for the last 2.5 million photographs I've shot, I've gone by the blinkies. I just set the exposure because I'm shooting raw only to give me the first blinkies and a highlight in the picture. And again, I'm not worried about the detail because I know I have it, because I know most cameras in raw, once you see the first blinkies, which remember are based on an embedded JPEG in the raw file, you probably could go another 2/3 to a stop more before you actually start overexposing the highlighted areas. So by just going to the first blinkies, you're always good to go on your highlights. And frankly, I can see the first blinkies a lot easier than I can see a little bit of highlights in the histogram. So I go by the first blinkies, and it's worked really well for me. And then back in the old days with the old DSLRs, I would focus here on a tripod, and I would manually focus right here on the front of this geyser right here. And this is Castle Geyser, by the way, which I find is more fun to photograph than Old Faithful. One, it goes off for 45 minutes. And then, but nowadays, because I'm using mirrorless, the autofocus is so much more accurate. I would just move my AF point right over here, and I would use the autofocus, and it would work out just fine. So I don't have to do it on manual anymore. And then with longer lenses, 300 millimeters can work good for landscapes, especially in places like northern Michigan, where you've got a lot of lakes during fall color, and you want to shoot all the colors on the other side of the lake at dawn. And so the 300 will reach across those small lakes and fill the frame with lots of color. And I especially like it when I've got good light on these colors, and then I've got gray clouds up there too. In fact, the darker the clouds and the more golden the sun in the fall colors, the prettier photograph's going to be. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, you want to stay out there and shoot as much as you can. And then another thing is, in the old days, we used a lot of filters. Today, I hardly use any filters because I can do a lot in processing, but the one filter everyone needs is a polarizing filter, especially in landscape photography. So here I'm photographing one of the rivers in the Smoky Mountain with no polarizer. And you can see there's a lot of glare here, a lot of bright areas here. So what I'm going to do is put a polarizer on and turn it. And I turn it, see, I can see the glare. I just turn that polarizer until I see all these bright areas darken. And then I simply shoot, and you can see how different it is. This is literally a minute later. And it takes all that glare off. It takes some of the blue light out, so it warms things up and gives you a lot nicer color. And these are actually within a moment of each other. And it's amazing the difference. So polarizer is really critical. And again, you got to turn that polarizer, look at the glare, and remove. Normally I remove as much as possible. And then remember, if you remove the glare as a horizontal, if you go vertical, you've got to turn that polarizer again because you just unpolarized the effect. So you need to turn the polarizer. And again, here's an example with no polarizer. And now I'll put the polarizer on, and now you can actually see there were clouds up there in the sky. And so polarizers are great for removing glare and also for darkening a blue sky to make the clouds more apparent. I'm sure you all know that, but if you're not doing that, you're really missing out in your landscape photos. And then, of course, I love the clouds. It's always nice to get a calm morning with lots of clouds and early morning sunshine. And this is Council Lake in Alger County, Michigan, one of my favorite lakes for fall color up there. Because as you probably know, I did workshops up there for about 30 years for the fall color, and it was a lot of fun. But now I'm doing other things, so I won't be up there for a while. And then I also like, this is late in the evening last year at Jackson Lake, and I love the clouds, how they just made nice reflection. And you'll notice that the reflections are always darker than the thing that's being reflected. And that's because obviously this light that's being reflected from up here hits the water. Some of that light is absorbed by the water, so therefore reflections are always darker. In fact, if you see reflection brighter, someone used a filter in an odd way to actually make them lighter than the thing that's doing the reflecting. Okay, and then calm water. That's the real key to a nice sunrise or sunset, to have calm water and get pretty reflections. Again, this is Jackson Lake. So in winter, when it's calm, it can be really nice to photograph. Okay, and then sometimes I don't really like a clean, plain blue sky, and it's kind of boring unless you had maybe the moon up there. But in this case, I composed a scene, and I put these maple leaves right up here in the sky just to fill up the very boring blue sky and let you concentrate really on the lake here and the fall colors. So I use the leaves to fill the empty blue sky here. And then also, as you know, I live over basically in Idaho, although I just bought another home in Indiana for the winter because I'm getting older and winter's a little bit brutal in Idaho. We have 6 months of bad snow and blizzards, and so I needed an easier place to winter, and I thought Indiana would be great. And so I'll be here too. But anyway, this of course is the Mormon Barns in Grand Tetons. And I could see the Grand Tetons from my home in Idaho. And so I spend a lot of time over there. And I like the Tetons to be grand. So you notice the way you do this is you don't walk up to the barn and photograph it because now the barn will be taller than the Teton. Instead, get about 50 yards away from the Mormon barns, use a longer lens. And now, relatively speaking, the mountains get much bigger than the barn. It's called perspective. And so in other words, if you want to have a real dominant foreground, go in close and use a wide angle lens. But if you want a dominant background, like these mountains here, in that case, you want to stay back, use a longer lens, and then relatively in size, the background will be bigger than the foreground. And then another thing is you got to be willing to work for some landscape. This was a morning in the Grand Tetons late in January. It's like 12 degrees below zero. And they weren't plowing the road out to the Mormon barns then. They were plowing it to about 1.33 miles from the barn. So we walked out there before sunrise at -12 to photograph the barns. And as you might expect, we were the only ones crazy enough to do that. But it was really pretty. It was very cloudy. Maybe that's why other people hadn't gone out there. But we got lucky. And we had a brief break in the clouds in the eastern sky. And you can see where the sun lit up the tops of the mountains right there. And also we got a little bit of sun on the Mormon barns here. That lasted for about half an hour. So that was a real special time. And that's because we took a chance and we suffered through the cold, and it worked out good for us. And then again, this is being even further away from that Mormon barn with a longer lens like a 200. Now look at how much bigger the Tetons are there to the barn. So by the further away you get, the bigger the mountain will get relative to the barn. And also sometimes, the Tetons are normally a morning shot because you get the early morning sun. And of course, in the evening, the Tetons run north and south. So in the evening, the Tetons block the sunlight. But occasionally, you'll get golden clouds above the mountains there. So you can get some really pretty sunsets in the Tetons. And then also, we use long lenses at times. This is probably about 400 millimeters. This is the lake over, let's see, what's the name of that lake? It's in Texas and Louisiana. Cattle Lake is a wonderful place. It's got all these cypress trees. I believe it's one of the biggest cypress lakes in North America. And during fall color, it's really special. If you've never been there, you need to go sometime during the fall color because you've never seen anything like it. It's wonderful. You can hire boats and go out there and photograph on the boat. It's really a great place to go. So it's called Caddo Lake, Caddo. And then another thing, best focus technique is what I normally do is now I use autofocus because of mirrorless, because you no longer have to AF micro adjust the focus like you did with the DSLR. They're very accurate. And so I just move a single AF point. I would probably move it like right over here because there's more contrast here. You wouldn't want to put your AF point here or put it right here because there's not much contrast, and that would help it focus on it. And now with a DSLR, then I would magnify like these trees here, and I'd manually focus on it to make sure I got precise focus. But mirrorless makes this way easier. And then for doing Old Faithful in winter, your best conditions are like this. Not lots of blue, because if you have a cloudy sky, you can't hardly see the geysers at all. And if it's snowing, you really can't see them. So you need a lot of blue sky. Sometimes you've got to use a polarizer to darken the sky a bit. And also, if there's no wind, the geysers will go straight up and up and up. They're really big. So calm, no wind, and cold too. The colder it is, the more steam you get. So really cold, no wind, blue sky, and you'll get beautiful shots of Old Faithful. And then also, always remember Castle Geyser. It's about another 10-minute walk from Old Faithful to the west. And the problem with Castle Geyser is it only erupts like once every 12 hours. And it has a window of like plus or minus an hour. But anytime I'm at Old Faithful, I always check because it's a predictable geyser, plus or minus an hour. And so therefore, if I'm close to when it's going to erupt, it's so special because it goes off for about 40 minutes or so that I'll go down there and it's worth the wait. Go down and photograph Castle. It's really a great geyser to photograph. And then I've been very lucky. I've lived out west for 30 years. I've traveled all over extensively in really wild areas. And one of my favorite places is a place called White Pocket. It's in northern Arizona, not far from Kanab, Utah. And for about a half a mile square or so, the whole train looks like this. It's just white and red and twisted, and it's just an amazing place to go. And you don't have to get a permit to go in there. You can drive in. Now, I got to tell you, you go to the National Forest and you get a map, and make whatever you do, don't make a mistake because you're not going to get out of there. It's sandy, and then it's rocky. You need a high clearance four-wheel drive, and you need to know how to drive it, and it's about 30 of the worst miles you've ever driven. But once you get there, it's wonderful. It's a short walk in to White Pocket. It's great. Let me show you another one. I mean, look at this. It's just amazing, the colors there. And I've liked it so well. I've been in there about 15 times. I've never gotten stuck. And normally what I do is because it's so hard to go in there, I'll normally sleep in the parking lot in my truck for about 3 nights and photograph for 3 consecutive days. And by then, the vultures are circling over me, so I know it's probably time to go back to town and get a shower. Okay, and then here again, this is White Pocket. I mean, look at this. If you've never been to White Pocket, you really want to go there. I mean, everyone's heard of the Wave. I've been lucky. I've been to the Wave 5 different times. It's a really great place, and I'd recommend it. It's a long walk, but it's not that hard to do, really. And it's great. But White Pocket's really fun. You can drive in. Also, another place in this area is called South Coyote Buttes, because the Wave's in North Coyote Buttes, and the other place is in South Coyote Buttes. And to be honest, North Coyote Buttes is famous for the Wave, but frankly, South Coyote Buttes is way more fun to photograph overall. the overall area is much more exciting. And the way in North Coyote Buttes isn't bad at all, but South Coyote Buttes is almost unknown. You can get a permit, almost nobody draws for it, so you can go in there, and it's really fabulous for photographing. But certainly get to White Pocket. I mean, look at this terrain here. Really a special place. And when we're at White Pocket, here's another one at White Pocket. I mean, I've spent quite a long time, 15 trips in, probably 60 days at White Pocket. I'd love to go back again with my new camera with what it can do today. And then this is my buddy Alan Charnley, a Lapeer dentist, and before he retired. And here's what we would do. Here's I'd drive in with a Suburban, and we would have a sleeping bag, and usually what we would do is just put them down in the sand and sleep at night. And of course we had a generator so we could have hot coffee in the morning, and we would just stay there for a few nights, and it was just a wonderful place to go. So and you see this truck, a lot of times I'll have a bedroll in the back of that truck. I've spent about 3,000 nights sleeping under the stars or in the back of that truck. So I like being way back in. I like camping. And I do well with it, and it's a lot of fun because, frankly, it's a lot easier to drive way back in and stay overnight right there on location and not have to try to drive in early in the morning. So I prefer to stay in my truck in a lot of those desert places. It's also a lot cheaper. It's free. There's no cost at all to doing that. Okay, let me see. Okay, here we go. And then another thing, let's talk about some waterfalls. Waterfalls, the very best time to do most waterfalls is probably when you don't want to be out there. But if you have a light drizzle and everything's wet, that's really the time to do a waterfall because the water saturates all the rocks, all the colors. You get much better color saturation. And of course, you've got to use a polarizer to remove the glare from all those wet surfaces. And like here's one of our clients in the Smoky workshop, and here we are, we all got umbrellas, so we're just shooting underneath an umbrella, photographing this waterfalls in a light drizzle. Okay, and then other waterfall, this is Undine Falls, it's on the north side of Yellowstone. A lot of people drive right by it, but it's right along the road on the north side on your way over toward Cook City, but it's really not very far from Mammoth at all. And then also I like to do intimate things in the landscape like lily pads, and I thought it made a nice pattern. It was right after a rainstorm, so there's water drops on everything. And I really like it. You notice how sharp it is. Well, the way I get sharp is I don't stop down to F22. I focus stack. I focus here and here, 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 and I merge all those pictures that were, all I did was I just changed the focus point in each of those pictures, and then I merged them with Helicon focus. And I'm the person who caught on to it right away, what stacking would do. And so I have a lifetime subscription to Helicon focus, so that's what I use for all my stacking. And to be honest, I've been doing photography for 50 years during a living, and focus stacking probably the most powerful tool that's come along in my lifetime outside of digital cameras. I mean, focus stacking solved problems that I struggled with for decades with film and later with DSLR. But when focus stacking came along and gave me unlimited depth of field to work with, that really changed how I approach photographs. And then other small things like here I've just got some flowers in a wheelbarrow, so I thought that was cute. So I do little things like that. I like to do weathered rock patterns, like especially in Utah and northern Arizona. And then in Kanab, Utah, during the winter, they have the hot air balloons. And if you get lucky, the first time I just happened to be in town. In they're having a hot air balloon festival like in January. So I thought, well, heck, I'll photograph them and maybe I'll like that. It was really fun, especially photographing all the balloons up against the red cliffs right there in Kanab. So the next year, I planned to be there. Well, that didn't work out because balloons have to have fairly calm conditions, and the wind was never low enough where they could lift off, so they never took off that year. But the first year was a lot of fun. And then another thing I do a lot of and this is Dixie's idea. This is a cabin in the Smokies, and Dixie said, well, why don't we light it up early in the morning, and we'll just use the LED lamps. So we've got 3 LED lights. There's like a flashlight mounted on a light stand, and when it's still dark, we go in and mount the LED lights there, and then it's still too dark to photograph it because there's no light in the sky yet. But then as the ambient light begins to come up well before sunrise, there's a point where the inside of the cabin is brighter than the outside, and so that's when we start photographing it. And what we do is we would focus. We could see this window, the wood in the window, so we'd focus there, stop down to about f11 or so, because it's still pretty dark. We don't want too high of an ISO. And we would set our exposure to produce the first blinkies in one of these lighted windows. Wherever it happened, those would be my exposure I set. So I would just keep adding light till finally I saw a blinky. Now don't be confused by that. The first blinky is very simple. If this exposure, if there's no blinkies, and then you add 1/3 stop more by either ISO, aperture, or shutter speed, take another shot and you've got a few blinkies, those are the first ones. And that's how I set the exposure. And it's really worked well for me for years now. I've had no trouble at all doing well with my photographs by exposing that way. And then another thing I do a lot of is I like to use flash, and I mean, I'm a person, because of the hummingbird workshops I used to run, I own 60 flashes, so I've got a lot of them. And I like to use flash in the landscape. So here's just a rock, a hoodoo right here over in, this is actually in Utah. And it's at sunset. There's no flash yet. And then I want to act like, or show a picture where it's like the golden sunshine came out. And so I put a warming filter on my flash, and then I fired it off during the exposure just to give some warm light, like the sun had sort of lit up this rock against the sunset. Just happened to pop out. And then here's another one. Again, this is another hoodoo in northern Utah, or actually southern Utah, and it's all natural light. So, and there was about 4 large format photographers out there with me, and I was just shooting my digital cameras. And once the sun set, they quit. There was no more light. Well, as soon as that happened, and I had the gray sky, then I went and changed things up. I went and brought the flash out and lit it up. Oop, I got that. Okay. Can I make that go away somehow? Okay, let me see here. Okay, anyways, I'm afraid to do anything because I might lose everything. And then here is a really big area of hoodoos, and in this case, I had to fire the flash 3 times. So I just put it on multiple exposure, and then I just fired my flash on full power 3 times. Because if I pointed it here, the right side wouldn't be lit up at all. So I'd point it here, I pointed it there, and I pointed it over here to light up a fairly big area. And then another place where I use flash, this is White Dome Geyser in Yellowstone, and I've got 4 flashes set up on light stands. And what I was hoping, and I didn't quite get it, was it was right at sunset, and about 10 minutes earlier, these clouds were all bright red. Well, of course, the geyser didn't go off then. So once I lost the red light in the cloud, then it went off. So I still used 4 flashes here to light it up against the dark clouds in the background. Okay, and I do a lot with the night sky. And again, my normal night sky exposure would be 20 seconds, f2.8 at ISO 3200. That works pretty well. And now that ISOs are getting better, you could use 6400, and that would give you even more stars in the sky. And what I figured out is that this is actually a double exposure. What I did here was I set my exposure for the background. I composed this rock here in the foreground, but I set the exposure for the background, and I manually focused on a star in the sky, and I shot that one. And then for the second part of the exposure, you can't change the ISO, unfortunately. If you start with 3200, you're stuck with that. But 2.8, I don't need 2.8 here, so I can go to f11, and I can kick the shutter speed up, and now I can use flash, and then I changed the focus as well on here, and shot that in, and then this is all done in camera. This is my result of those two shots, all done right in camera. So that was something that I learned about the flash, is that, again, I can change aperture, I can change shutter speed, I can change the focus point. I just have to stick with the same ISO. And that opened up a world of opportunities for me for doing night sky stuff. Again, this same thing. This is a double exposure. This is over at White Pocket. It's one of the bigger hills in White Pocket. And again, I used about 4 flashes here to light up this great big hill. And I focused here. I stopped down to about f11 using ISO 3200. Now, I didn't want to really use 3200 on here, but I would need it for the next shot, with in that multiple exposure, and that's where I focused on the stars again. I went to 20 seconds, I went to 2.8, and then I shot the night sky right into the picture. And again, so this is a multiple exposure, all done in the camera. No Photoshop, no software work at all. Okay, here's another one. I was doing, this is it's over by Mammoth there. It's the mounds. I forget the name right now, but at any rate, it's just beautiful. And what I did here is I only had one flash with me, so I went over here and I fired the flash twice. Then I came over here and fired the flash the third time, and then I pointed the flash over here and fired it a fourth time. So after 4 shots, I had Orange Spring Mound is what it's called, Orange Spring Mound. But I didn't have a moon there because I couldn't see the moon. And so I have that picture. I have just the Orange Spring Mound there. And so I get in the car, I drive out, and there out in the meadow, out in the open, I can see the full moon right here. And so I said, darn, I'd like to have that moon. So on my Canon cameras, in the multiple exposure mode, one of the controls it allows you to do is you can pick any picture already on your card, and your camera will copy that picture, and then you can shoot another thing into that picture. So I just copied the 4-shot multiple exposure here onto, I copied that using that control, and then it comes up in my viewfinder on the back of the camera so I can see it. I'm in live view, and then I point my lens of my camera at the moon, and because I'm in live view, I can see the moon, so I know if the moon is over here, don't shoot there. The moon shouldn't be sitting on Orange Spring Mound or in Orange Spring Mound. So I simply compose the moon, and then I use what I call the Mooney 11 rule, which is 1 over the ISO at f11, or any equivalent. So it could be, if the ISO is 30, say the ISO is 400, it could be 400 at f11 or 800 at f8, and that's the same equivalent. And I just shot the moon into that. And again, that's not Photoshop, any of that. That's all done right in the camera. And a lot of people have that capability, and they don't even know that they can copy a picture on their card, and the camera will copy it, and then they use that in another multiple exposure. So that was one thing. When I figured that out a number of years ago, I couldn't sleep for 2 nights. I was so excited about my new toy to play with, and I used it a lot, and it worked out really well. Made me a lot of sales, so that was good too. And then here again, I just did this last fall in the Smokies, where I knew I'd want to get a moon over here in this picture, and that famous dead tree on Klingman's Dome. So what I did was, when it was really dark, I just shot some pictures and put the moon in the picture. And then when it lightened up at sunrise, I composed the tree, and then I just picked a picture where the moon was in a favorable spot over here and shot it into it. Okay, and then another thing I do is I love arches, and this is Corona Arch. It's over by Arches National Park, but it's not in the park. It's actually on the National Forest land near Moab, and there's a trail to it, and you can get direction, and it's not a bad trail to walk. So I went in there in the afternoon to photograph Corona Arch. Very pretty, but what I really wanted to do is stay there during the night and photograph it with the stars, and there it is at night. And so I stayed, and I was photographing until about 2 in the morning, and then rather than navigate that trail in the dark, what I did was I just curled up on a nice soft rock and went to sleep until sunrise. And then at first light, I photographed it again in the sun, and then I walked out. So I'm used to sleeping under the stars, not a big deal. I'm not worried about snakes or spiders or anything. I've never had any problem. And but it's just a really pretty place to be. And naturally, once again, I had the whole place to myself. Okay, now I'm using an animal here, but I want you to know that autofocus is not reliable in falling snow. The problem with autofocus, whether you're doing a building or an animal, is that autofocus is so good, it'll normally focus on a snowflake right in front of the animal. So the animal is always a little bit soft, or the landscape's a little bit soft. And people say, well, it's soft because there's snow in the way. That's not it. It's soft because you did not hit sharp focus on the critter. So the best way to get focus in the snow, there's two ways that I use. For years, what I would do is I would go to manual focus, like I would magnify the face of that bison there, and I would manually focus right on the hair on his face. That worked pretty well. Another thing I learned to do a couple years ago was, because most people have in-camera focus stacking, what I do is I set it to 6 shots with a tiny increment of 1. And since I know that it's probably going to focus slightly in front of the critter or the landscape on snowflake, I know the first shot won't be really sharp, and probably the second one won't either. But normally, but after it focuses and does the first shot, then focus stacking, the lens will automatically focus a little further toward the subject, and usually the third or fourth shot is focused right on the subject, and then I just use that when I throw the other ones away. Boy, does that work really well in heavy snow. In fact, here's another one in heavy snow, and this is when I focus stack. I just focus like on these trees right here, and I shot the 6-shot stack, and I got it all sharp. On one of them. All the rest of them I threw away. So that worked out great. Okay, I also love doing landscapes, especially when you can combine fall color and snow at the same time. Here in Michigan, got lucky. It doesn't happen every year, but when it does, that's not a time to go have lunch or breakfast. That's a time to be out there and photograph colors with snow until the snow melts. So then that's what I would do. I'd work it hard. Here's one. Here's another one. So pretty on the days when you get that snow and you got mirror reflection, the peak of fall color. And I also love doing frost as well. In Yellowstone, you get a lot of frost, real heavy frost. So you actually it's cold, but boy, if you can get a morning that's 10 degrees below zero or even more, get out there early. And because of the thermals, there's a lot of moisture in the air, and you get real heavy frost formation, especially in the thermal field, and that's a great time for photographing frost in Yellowstone. And here, another frosted Yellowstone one, and another one with a little fog, just real moody in those situations. And of course, I like doing winter waterfalls. Most of you probably know this is Firehole Falls, and the nice little waterfalls to photograph, especially if you've had a lot of fresh snow, because fresh snow cleans everything up very nicely. And I use a polarizer, because the polarizer will take the glare out of here. It takes the glare out of here. It gives you a little more dark contrast here. And then I probably would focus right here or right here, shoot them about f13 or so. And then snow, a lot of people say snow is hard to get proper exposure on. I think it's easy. All you got to do is go to the first blinkies in the snow. So, and in fact, snow is one time when I almost never use an auto exposure mode at all. I just go to manual. And I pointed at the snow. Normally I've got to add about 2 stops of light to actually get white snow. So I do that, I take a shot, and I look for blinkies. If there's no blinkies, I add another third of a stop, usually by slowing the shutter down 1/3 of a stop. Take another shot, check. If there are blinkies in the snow, that's what I go with. It works great. Again here, this is Kepler Cascade in Yellowstone. And again, just working with the snow and the pattern there. And then always, some people go someplace once and they think they're done. I never think like that. This is one of my favorite little hot pools in Yellowstone. And most people, they go to Old Faithful and that's only what they do. What they don't know is there's Blue Star Spring and there's also Chinese Spring right behind it. And so here we went during, when we were doing winter workshops, one week we had this and it was a little warmer, didn't have all the frost. And this is Chinese Spring. And of course, there's a lot of depth. This is really close to the boardwalk here. That's far away. So of course, I'm focus stacking to get everything sharp. But then the next week was much colder and we had a lot more frost. And I think because there's a lot less brown ground and a lot more white, I find this side is a much prettier photograph. So I was really excited to see that. So to me, this is a really choice photograph. This isn't nearly as good as this one. And so, and I only got that because I went back, I was leading a group, and hopefully on my own I would have known to go there because it was so frosty, it totally changed the situation for everyone. And then again, I love fall colors. Again, Michigan's really good for fall color. And so here's one, and just you want calm morning. That works really well. And by the way, another thing I do a lot of is every landscape I do shoot plain raw, but my camera has an in-camera HDR. So I like to shoot at least one shot in HDR, and this is an HDR version, and it's plus or minus one stop, and I'm using the vivid mode, and that really pops the colors. Now sometimes it looks a little too much and artificial, but I like color, and so in this case I liked it, and it just worked better than my raw file even when I processed it. Okay, and then image stabilization. I don't shoot landscapes a lot handheld. I am doing a little bit more. I'm getting older now. I'm 70. Can't believe that, but I am. But at any rate, I find that in deep snow with wide angle lens when you got lots of light, I normally would just shoot handheld. Like Old Faithful, I only shoot handheld because you've got to quickly jump from vertical to horizontal and you're shooting it with a 24 millimeter lens and you've got lots of light and you've got an image stabilized lens. There's no reason to not use handheld. In fact, with those wide angle lenses with image stabilization, I've tested it by using image stabilization handheld and on a tripod using excellent technique. I can't tell the difference in sharpness, so I'm not afraid to shoot handheld. And then when I'm doing handheld, I always have image stabilization turned on. And this is, of course, the famous lighthouse in Munising Bay. And I'm on the Pictured Rocks boat cruise, of course, during the peak of fall color, and using a longer lens, but I got image stabilization on. I mean, when you're on a boat, you've got to have handheld and image stabilization. You're better off to do that than try to use a tripod on a boat, because if it rocks, the tripod's going to really move your camera. You're better off in that case to absorb some of that vibration with your body and just shoot handheld, and of course maybe favor a little more shutter speed. Okay, and then this is the white dome, it's down in Tucson, Arizona, Sanavir Mission. They call it the white dove of the desert. And for the last couple of years, we couldn't photograph it because they were remodeling it and repainting it, so there was scaffolding all around this thing. But this year it was perfect. This is what it looks like this year. They've done away with all the scaffolding. They've got it painted, and it looks really nice. I would love to have had some clouds in the background, but I didn't have it that morning. And so I did different compositions, tighter. And the thing about this is you notice all these verticals are pretty much straight up and down. The last thing you want to do is walk close to it and shoot up with a wide angle lens, because all those verticals are going to tip right over and it's going to be a really odd shape. So what we did with our group was we stayed way far away from it and used a longer lens and tried to shoot it's parallel to the ground as possible, not point the lens up at all. Here's another version of it. And so as the light changed, we'd keep trying different versions. And by
Hey,
the way,
John, do you ever
yeah.
use a tilt shift lens for these kind of?
I don't anymore. I used to use tilt shifts a lot back in the film days, but and frankly, there are the few times when I could use the shift feature. I don't need tilt because that's for getting more depth of field, which I get with focus stacking. So therefore, I don't have a great. I see Canon's coming out with a bunch of them, but I don't really need them, and I don't think I want to spend the money and carry it with me just for the few times when I actually need the shifting so I can keep verticals vertical. I mean, I don't do many buildings, but again, I don't need it for depth of field because I would just stack it, and that works really well. But that's a good question. And then here's the raw picture, and then here I think is that's process, and I consider myself computer illiterate, and the software I use is just Canon Digital Photo Professional, and I've used it for years. I've done really well. I've made lots of sales. It's been very good for my career. And the problem with it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. So if you shoot Canon, you can use it free. Unfortunately, when people review it, they always say, "Well, it's slow and it's not very good." Well, what they're telling you is they haven't used it enough to understand it. So therefore, it's not good because they don't know how to use it. Just like me with Zoom, I'm not good with it either because I don't really understand it all.
Yes,
But
but it
once you
was on the
understand it, it works great.
it was on the Petapixel list of worst photo editing software ever.
Oh,
Okay,
I
just
love it.
recently.
I mean, I made a great living with it. So I'm no expert. I mean, almost everyone in the audience knows more about processing than I do. I just sell pictures and they send me money, and that keeps me happy. And most pictures that I process, like these you're looking at, I have about 1 minute into it. Generally, I'm just adjusting the contrast, the highlights, the shadows, maybe popping some colors. I might clone out some distractions that I don't want. So about 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half, and I'm done with it. And I post it on my Facebook page, and that's all I'm doing. And I also edit with the Canon software. I can go through 3,000 bird pictures in about an hour, cut it down to 89 that I want to keep. And so it works great for me, but I've used it for several years, and I'm pretty good with it. Okay, and then the fog adds mood. I love to have mood, and that's one nice thing I'm going to like about Indiana is we have almost no fog in Idaho because it's too dry. But Indiana this morning was really foggy, for example, and Michigan has great fog, and probably Wisconsin does, and I bet Illinois does. Really foggy mornings and stuff. And during the fall color, it adds a lot of mood to everything. Here we go. It gets more fog, and it's just burning off the lake, just beautiful. And more fog. So when I get these foggy mornings and dead calm, peak of fall color, boy, I'm really excited. I shoot a lot. And of course, you know me, this is across the lake here, so I don't need to stop down. I just focus right on the shoreline, use F8, because that's a sharp aperture, and go with that. And I get the first blinkies, which are probably going to happen in the fog right up in here. Once I start getting blinkies up there, I go with that. Okay, and then I set the exposure manually when there's a lot of snow, because I just set so it's got creates the first blinkies in the snow, and I go with that. And it reminds me of an undulating sort of a snake right here. It's actually Old Faithful, late in the eruption when the wind's blowing it over like that. But I sort of like that. I said, well, that's kind of fun. And by the way, don't walk out there and look down the cone of Old Faithful. They call that a cone walker. And so you don't want to do that. And some people do. It's amazing. They'll be on camera and they're out there walking on that. And it's not only bad for the feature there, but it's also very dangerous. You could always break through and not do well. And then one of my favorite hot springs in Yellowstone, in fact, it is my favorite. This is called Chocolate Pots. And I'll bet most people who have been to Yellowstone never see it. And it's right along the road, but you won't see it unless you stop in the little parking lot there. And it's just a little bit north of Gibbon Falls. And if you get all the way to Norris Geyser Basin, you went too far. It's going to be on the west side of the road. But Chocolate Pots is always beautiful. And what I do is I walk down the hill a little bit so I have a clear shot at it. Because from the parking lot, you got some pine tree branches and coming into the area. But if you get to go down the hill 10, 20 feet, you can get past all that. Use a polarizer, and that really brings up the colors in Chocolate Pots. So that's always a fun one. And if you take our Yellowstone tours that we do at a garden, and we always stop at Chocolate Pots one of the days that we're in the park. And this is that Norris Geyser Basin. And even on a dark, cloudy day, the geyser fields and the colors in there still come up very nicely against all the white. And again, use a polarizer to get even more color in the hot pool. Okay, and then almost done here. Just Mammoth Hot Springs is wonderful, and Mammoth changes a lot. Every time I go there, it's very different because the water that builds up, as the water that comes from the ground builds up and precipitates, and it changes the flow of the water. And you don't have color unless there's water flowing over it. Once it's dry, it just turns white. And so here's one, and a cloudy day, and here's another one. And again, this is a few years ago. It's all changed now, but it's always really nice. And then here's another one. So Yellowstone is a great place to practice a lot, great place to be. And of course, I live close to Yellowstone. About 20 minutes, I'm in the west gate of Yellowstone National Park. So I go there quite often. And then just reviewing some of this stuff, with a DSLR, I mainly use manual focus, and then with a mirrorless camera, which I think most people are using today, autofocus works really well because the reason is the focus sensor and the image sensor on the same plane. So before with a DSLR, you had the focus sensor up in the pentaprism, and so it was really hard for them to make a camera where it's exactly the same distance through the lens to the sensor as to the focus mechanism up in the pentaprism. So they always varied a bit, and that would cost you a little bit of loss of sharpness. But now, because they're on the same plane in a mirrorless camera, you get much better focus. Exposure, I usually do it on manual. In fact, when doing landscapes and close-ups, I virtually always use manual exposure. When I'm doing wildlife, I virtually never use manual exposure. Most of the time, I'm going to use auto ISO with exposure compensation. And then when I'm doing landscapes, I use f8 if the closest object is already at infinity focus. There's no point of actually stopping down anymore. And then if it's not, if I have a lot of depth, then I'll go to focus stacking, which I'm going to actually show you some more examples coming up. I set the exposure with the blinkies. In other words, I don't really go by the histogram. The histogram I can see, it gets me close. I take a shot because I don't have, I have to take a shot and play it back to tell if I have any blinkies. I wish I had pre-blinkies where it happens. Some cameras do that, but so far my Canon cameras haven't done that, so I got to shoot one to see if there are blinkies. And then when you were with the DSLRs, I had to go and use live view a lot because then the shutters already open the mirrors up. That would cost you sharpness if that thing, because it causes vibration. And of course, with mirrorless, you don't have that problem really. And then I use a touch. I use the touch shutter a lot. And what that is in landscapes is you just touch the LCD where you want focus. It'll focus there, and then I have it on 2-second self-timer, and then it'll count down 2 seconds and take the shot. And I set it to sensitive, so I barely got to touch my LCD screen, and that'll all happen. Or I can use the 2-second self-timer. That works really well too. And then focus stacking is so powerful. I hope everyone's doing it. It came out for macro. It actually came out in the medical field when doctors and medical people wanted to really see what a tumor looked like and get a three-dimensional picture. They had to stack it so they could put it all together. Well, that immediately got applied to close-up. And then when I saw I could do that, I immediately started using it in the landscape because I had so many depth of field problems in the landscape. And lately, I've been doing a lot of stacking in wildlife photography as well, because if 2 or more animals are holding still, you can stack them and get them all sharp, so it works great there. So in this case, this is a stacked result. I focused here, I focused here, and then I focused on the background, and I stacked those 3 together, and this is the Smoky Mountain. This is what you see during our workshops coming up. And we just do one during the peak of fall color in the Smokies. And then here is in the Smokies as well. And look at the depth there. It's sharp all the way down here. And what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the closest object. And I used to manually change focus. Now I'm lazy. Cameras have built-in automatic focus stacking. So I just set it for focus stacking, and I'll run, maybe 12 shots using increment 3, focus here, and I just let it rip. And frankly, if it only took 9 shots to get all the way here, then when I go to process it, I just don't run the last three that I don't need. So you don't, just because you shoot them doesn't mean you've got to run them. And again, I'm using Helicon Focus. And here's another stacked image in Yellowstone. I'll show you some more. Here's an example where, okay, here I'm focused on the maple tree. So you can see how far the background's out of focus. And I'm going to use F8 because, again, that's a sharp aperture. So I focus on the maple tree. And then for the next shot, I focus on the background. And now you can see the maple tree is way out of focus. Okay, and then with Helicon, I just merge those two together. And now I've got everything sharp. That works much better than focusing on a tree and stopping down to f16 or 22. You're going to lose some overall sharpness due to diffraction. So you can avoid that by using f8 and just change your focus and stack them together. And again, I'm not great with computers, but even I think Helicon Focus is really easy to do. There's nothing to it. I can actually teach groups how to do it. And that's saying a lot because, again, I struggle with computers, but Helicon Focus is very straightforward. It's a wonderful software that's really helped me a lot in my career. And then here's another example. This is a famous statue now. It's over by Jackson, Wyoming. And so I'm shooting through the tree. And it's actually a nice picture the way it is with these trees way out of focus. So I focus there. But then if I want everything sharp, I can do another shot and focus on the foreground. And of course, the statue is now way out of focus. And then with Helicon, I just merge those two together. So you don't have to do them all that way, but you have a choice now by stacking. You can get something in sharp focus that's 1 inch in front of your camera, and then the other thing that infinity focus, 50 yards away. You can make them both perfectly sharp if you wanted to. So now what I do, the way focus stacking changed me in the landscape, is that I look for really strong foregrounds. Could be a clump of flowers. And I might get a foot away from that clump of flowers. And now I know I can get the flowers sharp and the background that's a half a mile away sharp too. Never could do that before. Okay, again, this is focus stacking. Just shooting here, 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 and probably right up here. Maybe 3 or 4 of them manually set. And again, now I would just use the in-camera focus stacking and let it run it. And some cameras now will actually shoot the stack of pictures and put them together for you. So you don't even need Helicon Focus, but I don't have a camera like that. Again, this is Laughing Whitefish Falls in northern Michigan. This is a manual stack. I focus here, I focus here, and I focus here and stacked it all together. And then this is another little waterfall. It's only a foot tall in northern Michigan. And what I did is I shot about a 20-shot automatic focus stack, focusing at the closest point here and let it rip, making sure it focused all the way to the background. And then I merged them all together. And again, another focus stack. This is that famous forest of red pine trees. These are the red pines that just happen to have some maples growing among the pines. And during the peak of fall color, you get all these bright red maple trees, surrounded by all these red pines. So it makes a really nice color combination. And if you want to get them all sharp, just find whatever tree is closest, focus there and focus on the next one, focus here, focus there, merge them all together, and you've got terrific sharpness all the way through. And again, you're using f8, you're not suffering diffraction problem, you get much better quality that way. Here's another one. You probably know this. Some of you have been to Grand Sable Dunes in northern Michigan. And here, these are just some red. See how close I am? I'm like 2 feet away from these red leaves. And I focus there and shoot. And, of course, the Grand Sable Dunes is way out of focus. So then I go and move the AF point over here, and I shoot that one. And you can see the red is all out of focus. But then in Helicon Focus, I merge them together. And now I've got good focus throughout the picture. So you have that choice if you want it, and I'd highly recommend it. It's a lot you can do. Okay, and then almost done. One of my favorite places to photograph in winter, especially if you get fresh snow, is the Bryce Canyon. It is fabulous with all these red rocks, these hoodoos, and fresh snow all over them. And fortunately, I'm close enough where if I hear there's a winter storm that happened at Bryce Canyon, I can drive down there. And one day, the next day, I can be photographing it. And so I've been lucky a couple times and been able to get Bryce Canyon with fresh snow on it. Here's one version. Here's another one. And another. I mean, look, and these are from the viewpoint. And the nice thing about Bryce Canyon is you're way up high, but it's in the desert, so they don't have snow all the time, so you never know if you're going to have snow. So you got to be a little bit lucky. But when they have snow, they have great big snow plows, and they plow everything out pretty easily. So you can get to all these viewpoints. And it's just amazing. I mean, if you've not been to Bryce Canyon, you need to go, but especially during snow. It's just wonderful. Look at that. What a vista to look at. I'm on the viewpoint. Maybe there's 6 or 7 other people because it's late January, and it's just wonderful to be there. Just a great place to go. Okay, so coming to the end of the program, I'll end it with another Bryce Canyon one. And you see it was cloudy that day, but the bright rocks and the red really worked well. So that's what I have for you tonight. What about questions? And anybody have any questions for me? I'll be glad to answer them as long as I can figure out what they are. I'm a little hard of hearing, but with my the tools I'm using, I probably will do okay, I hope.
John,
Anybody
why
have a
don't you
question?
stop? Why don't you stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody?
Okay, so
Stop
you are
sharing
sharing
your-
screen, so I say stop share, right?
Right.
Okay, I'm doing that.
There you go. Now we can see everybody.
Okay.
All right. Anybody have any questions for John? I just want to make one point. Yeah, a Helicon focus, if you're doing lots of focus stacking, it's absolutely worth the $159 or whatever it is that you're spending for it.
Yeah.
But if you're only doing a few a year, Photoshop works fine. It's way slower than using Helicon Focus. Maybe it doesn't work quite as well, but it works pretty well, and you already have it because you have the photography plan, right?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. A lot of softwares can do stacking now. In fact, even the free software from Canon has stacking capability. I've just never done it because I have Helicon and I'm used to doing it with Helicon.
Yeah, I've had Helicon for like my flower stuff. The Orchid Show. I shoot a lot of stacks, but if you don't, then yeah, it's in Photoshop. It's all in the edit menu. You align the images. You select all your images, align them, merge them. It's super simple. So, any other questions for John about anything that he said? You have to unmute yourself if you want to talk because everyone was muted. So
Okay, so they have to unmute themselves?
they have to
Okay.
unmute themselves. Yeah, you're
Okay.
John, this is Karen Frischman. It's good to see you.
Okay, I'm trying to make you out. Okay.
She's not sharing her video.
I can't get my video.
All right, well,
light's gone.
ask your question.
No question. I just wanted.
Oh, you wanted to share a video. Okay. Why, am I in it? Never
I
know where I
think
might
you
show
are.
up.
No, she wanted to share her video.
Okay.
He can't do it anyway. Well, if there's no questions, John, why don't you tell us where people can find your workshops?
Well, of course, I have a website. What is it? www.gerlachnaturephoto.com. And all of our workshops are on there. And we do, like we have the one in the Smokies coming up, Fall Color. Is really good. Another thing is on the website, I have a lot of instructional articles. So if you go directly to the website on the computer, not on your phone, but on the computer, and go past all the workshops that are listed, I've probably got about 15 instructional articles there that are all illustrated. Because what I do is when I learn new stuff, because I'm constantly pushing the envelope and figuring out new ways to photograph. For example, like how to get sharp pictures in a snowstorm by focus stacking. I write it up. It helps me to remember what I'm doing, and I share it with everybody. So you might want to look at that. There's lots of information on the website and in the articles.
John?
And be sure to subscribe, because that way, about once a month, I'll send out a little newsletter. And most of the time, in fact, always, I'll include something new in that newsletter.
John?
Yeah.
I have a question. I have a baby steps question for you. Can you tell us for a few minutes how you define blinkies, a term you use often?
Blinky, those are the flashing highlights. You know, they call it the highlight alert. Yeah, Canon calls it highlight alert where it's flashing, and that's what I go with. Those, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. I guess I've just called it blinkies for so long, but it's the highlight alert. All cameras have that. What's really odd is you have to turn it on. You get a new camera that's usually not active. Why
Ah.
would you want a camera that doesn't show you the highlight alert or the blinkies?
Because people are using some other method to determine their
Yeah, but this
their
is so
focus.
quick and easy, and it
Yeah,
it works great.
I always thought it was intrusive. It shows up in the image and with little zebra stripes kind of
Yeah,
thing.
zebra. That's right. Now some cameras have the zebras. That would
They
work
call it
too.
zebra stripes. So just look in your menu of your camera and see if you can turn on the zebra stripes or the highlight alert or whatever they.
Yeah, but thanks for asking that question because probably other ones wondered what's the blinkies he's talking about. But it's just a highlight alert.
John, thanks very much for an excellent presentation. Fascinating and
Okay, well,
generous. Thank you.
good. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Some great images, lots of information. We really appreciate it. And everybody, in a couple of days, I'll have this presentation on the Garden Photographic Society YouTube channel, which you can just go to YouTube and search for Garden Photographic Society. And there you'll see like 15 or 20 or however many we have of these workshops that we've recorded. So anyway, that's it. This is the last garden program of the year. So thank you so much to John Gerlach, and check out his offerings on his webpage, his workshops, his trips. And thanks everybody for attending. We had 50 people watching today, and we will see you all next fall with some new programs, new events, and of course our monthly competitions at the garden club. Okay.
Okay,
John,
great.
and
Thanks everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Have a good summer, everyone.
Yeah, you bet.
Hi, Jawa.
Okay.